Hey, folks, welcome to a new episode of the Whiskey Ring podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to be returning to Scotland and to the Hebrides in particular to welcome on Shona Macleod. She's going to be talking to us about Isle of Harris Distillers. So, Shona, welcome on. Same here, same here. Uh, so, Isle of Harris is a relatively new distillery, started producing in 2015 or so. So, we're just seeing their products hit market in 2023, increase in 2024, and we'll see what happens in 2025. Uh, Whiskey products. I'm sorry, I should say whiskey products. The gin has been around for a while and has been a smash hit, and we will get to that. But just to set the stage for us, Shona, if you will, the elevator pitch of what's the origin story for Isle of Harris Distillers. Joining us also for the conversation, we have Iona Cairns. She is the USA Business Development Manager for Isle of Harris, and she and Shona will be my co-guests today. So Iona, we were just talking with Shona about the origin story of Isle of Harris.
Fantastic. Oh, and Shona's back. in in true style. I think you're on mute, Shona, but you are back. Um, but just by Shona's getting sorted, I'll kick off to keep things going, David. So
Sure.
um the story of Harris, well, apologies if I'm repeating anything Shona's said so far, but the distillery opened its doors back in 2015, September 2015. So it'll be our 10-year anniversary coming up this year, which is quite hard for all the team to believe that we're 10 years into our journey. But the actual kind of project started before that. So the idea of the distillery started a few years before the distillery was even built and opened. And it started by a man called Anderson Bakewell, or Burr, as we know him. And he had been coming to Harris for many years. He had come over as a college student. He's actually American. He's British American. So he had come over with a friend many years ago and just fell in love with this beautiful island in the Outer Hebrides in Scotland. Thought it was this magical place with such a warm community, an amazing landscape. And he really felt a kind of sense of home and belonging there. Um, so all these years on and having this fond connection with the island, he actually owns a wee small island off Paris where he has a house and spends a lot of time. He really wanted to give something back to this place. And through his own eyes over the years, he had seen that Paris and like many other, rural places, I'm sure around the world, had been facing challenges of, um, especially younger people going through school there and then going off to college or university and sadly not returning because they weren't able to find jobs or career opportunities. So the population of Harris had been declining quite rapidly, and now we're down to under 2,000 people living on the island. So Barr had this idea that he wanted to create something that would encourage people to stay in Harris, would encourage people to live and move back, and also reach their full career potential in doing so. So that wasn't a barrier. And a business that would also help the whole island. So not just about keeping it all at the distillery, but the idea behind a distillery was it would then be a sort of catalyst for change and economic growth for hotels, cafes, other shops, to encourage lots of people to come and visit and stay and live and work and experience what an amazing place Harris was. So Barr had this fantastic idea, and he, as I say, the few years before the distillery teamed up with our managing director Simon Erlanger and our CFO Ron McKerkin, and the three of them, along with kind of set out on this mission to start up this distillery on this island. We've got a fantastic and supportive board of directors, so we're privately owned. And as I say, the distillery was built and opened its doors in September 2015, starting with just 10 members of staff, and Shona and our husband Donnie being two of them. And so they're known as the Tarbert 10, the first Tarbert's a village that the distillery sits in Harris. So they're among the first members of the team. And I'm sure Shona won't mind me saying on this, but I think at the time, not many people really knew what they were doing. It wasn't that we had, it wasn't like we took people in from the industry that were distillers and with that background. It was, very much local people, with backgrounds that definitely helped in their roles in the distillery. But actual distilling was very new to everyone. So had some great training and experts and guidance along the way, and still have people involved that we've had from the start guiding us along. But it's been amazing to see how the team have developed and grown and expanded over the last 10 years. So we've gone from, as I say, 10 members of staff to now about 50 members of full-time staff now, which is, for a small island with less than 2,000 people on it, is fantastic. And it shows that, this initial vision that Burr had to create local employment and bring people to Harris has been working. So especially for the local islanders and everything, it's wonderful to see the distillery and its journey it's been on. And obviously now we've got our gin and our whisky out there in the market, so people can enjoy around the world, even if they're not coming to Harris. They hopefully can get a sense and a taste of what we do and why we're doing it from afar as well. So it's been a really special project, a really meaningful project, not just about wonderful spirits, but also very much about what the distillery is doing for the island.
Wonderful. And one of the first questions I had was, and Shona, you mentioned this briefly, that Burr was not a whiskey person, really. That wasn't, he might have had some whiskey here and there, but it wasn't his industry. He had been involved, as far as I can tell, with Harris, having visited, as you said, as a college student, and then owning an island nearby since the 60s even. But 2007 is when the idea started to take place, and then fundraising took a couple of years before you're building in 2014, opening in 2015. I'm curious, looking at 2007 as that pivot point, was there some like inciting event or something that finally had him say, you know what, this is when I want to start this?
Well, I think really, as I mentioned earlier before I got cut off, he wasn't a whiskey man, but he set about to find people who were. And really what he wanted to create, as Iona said, was something with longevity, long-term employment, something that would last, not just years, but decades and generations. And the more romantic version of the story is that Burr was kind of standing on a hillside, and he loves Harris so much, he thought to himself, how can I bottle this island and share it with the world? So it was an element of that as well. And I think it dawned on him, well, we all know that the whiskey industry, it's a very long-term investment. It's a long-term plan. It's not something that is here today and gone tomorrow. So that's really how he arrived at, well, all the inner Hebridean islands have whiskey distilleries. We hadn't traditionally, but with modern day, logistics and things, you can make whiskey anywhere. You don't have to have a barley field at your front door. So that's really how it came about. I think it was definitely an element of him wanting to bottle Harris and sharing it with the world, but also the realization that, if he set down those foundations and found the right people today, that it would certainly be there for the long term.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, and let's say around 2007, all the way up until the time of starting production, were there other distilleries that Burr and the team looked at as examples that they could follow? And this could be ones that were already working, but also similarly remote ones that were under construction or under thought at the time.
Well, actually, not really. I mean, what he did was he went out and found people from the industry, and they worked as consultants. So, scientists, maltsters, people who had managed distilleries.
Oh, I think our island Wi-Fi is maybe failed us again. I just went sure I can.
So that is a similar story. Can you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you now. Sorry, you cut off for a wee second there, Shona.
Even my 4G isn't working very well. So yes, actually, it was probably the opposite, David. I think since we opened, more, other distilleries on neighbouring islands have popped up with a very similar story to ours. I've often said the world didn't need another malt whisky, but our island did, and other colleagues in the neighbouring islands are doing the same thing for a similar reason. Raasay, for example, and some of the couple of new distilleries in Uis, the island next to us.
And I should note, Raasay is one of the ones on my prospect list that I've been looking to talk to. I'm in touch with Alistair over there.
Oh yeah.
There's also, and I'm going to butcher this pronunciation, so please bear with me. Well, actually, I'll leave it to you. The one on Lewis, initials AD. I'll hear it from you first. Avangera. Thank you.
It means red river, yeah. Avon is the Gaelic for river, and Hearach is red in Gaelic.
Okay, I was going to butcher that, so I appreciate you stepping in for that one. So there's one other island I just want to mention briefly, which is, so Isle of Harris specifically has, as far as we know, no legal whiskey distillation history, maybe not even any illegal. But there is the island of Pabe, just off the coast of it. It comes up again and again in looking in the history, where this is the place where whiskey making happened in the Outer Hebrides. And so right now it's uninhabited.
Yeah.
It's a very small islands, 250 hectares. So in reading Dave Broom's book, A Sense of Place, in which Isle of Harris was one of the featured distilleries, Dave was interviewing Bill Lawson, and Bill said, when Pabe was cleared, that knowledge went. How many people knew how to make whiskey? Was it just one family? We don't know. It was gone. In that, and then fast forwarding to a separate interview, I believe with you, Shona, many years later, saying that the current recipe for Isle of Harris whiskey was developed in the Scotch Malt Whisky Society Leith location, and that it wasn't about regionality. It was about, as you said, about Harris, rather than being even Hebridean, but Harris. So this is all to ask, you really had a chance as a team to start tabula rasa from scratch and determine what you wanted this profile to be. So as you say, you and the team and Burr brought in specialists and consultants. So what was that process like to figure out the recipe and profile that you wanted to create?
Yeah, well, because of our location, and there had never been an Outer Hebridean distillery on a commercial scale like ourselves. So we weren't, forced into a corner of trying to be a certain style of whiskey. So, we didn't have to be like Lowland whiskey or Highland or Islay. It was, as you said, very much just about the flavour profile that we thought would suit where we are. It's kind of almost a new whiskey region in Scotland, really. Maybe one day it will be officially. I certainly hope so, with all these distilleries popping up. So there's a bit of freedom there, a bit of, free reign. And when we started filling casks initially, the type of casks that we chose were largely down to our consultants who, recommended certain things that we didn't know then. We're only learning now how our spirit is developing within these casks. Our oldest whiskey is 8 years old, so it's still very young. It's still, in its infancy. So, we had an idea based on our guidance that we had from our consultants of what casks to use. And then as time went on, after 3-4 years, we started drawing samples for the first time and putting different ratios of casks together to create the recipe for the Hearach with our flavour consultant, Dr. Gordon Steele. So that was really exciting. So there wasn't a script to say this is what it should taste like or smell like. This is the flavour profile. We didn't have that. So it was quite organic. And that was great for us because we were finding our feet and learning as we did that.
I have to say, I have, just looking at the batch number, I have for the Hearach, the company was generous enough to send the original, the Oloroso cask finish, as well as, of course, the gin, which cannot be missed. So whatever was done with batch HE 1724 was just gorgeous.
So it's the same recipe we've used in all our batches, but because there are quite a small number of casks involved in each batch, you do get that natural variation of flavour. But it's essentially the same recipe, same number of certain types of casks within that mix.
No, it was really lovely. It's again why I love talking to distilleries like Harris, similar these new wave coming through. There's new flavors. I can say offhand, this is very lightly peated. It's 13 to 15 ppm, on the grain. So it's, I don't know, a general rule here. It's probably about 3 ppm when it comes in the bottle. But what's noticeable is that not only is it a very well controlled and lovely peat, it's very sweet peat. Probably the sweetest that I can certainly remember. So is the peat that you're using local as well?
It's not actually. We have done that on one occasion. We have cut our own peat, but we haven't done anything with those casks yet. So it's Highland peat that we use from the maltsters on the mainland, always Scottish barley. So it's Highland peat. But what we have found is that our new mix spirit is always really sweet as well. And I think if I could show you, if I could take you on a video call, I'd probably get cut off again. into the still room. Everything is in the one room. So we've got our mill and our mash tun on one side, and then we've got 8 beautiful Oregon pine washbacks, and the stills are right next to the washbacks. So everything's in quite close proximity. We do long and short fermentation, so it's very fruity. But we think the kind of layout of the still room there and the heat within it is making their spirit quite sweet. And it just so happens that matures into a wonderful whiskey. And I mention as well, we don't finish, by the way. I think you mentioned finished in an Oloroso cask. So we haven't done any finishing. We've just matured from new make to mature whiskey to date. I'm sure it's something we'll try in the future. Yeah.
Yes, that was a misstatement by me. That I didn't know it was matured, and it's one of those things I'm sure you face on questioning that we're so used to finishing as opposed to full maturation that's just the default that sometimes comes out. So thank you for catching that for me. Just jumping back, because Isle of Harris, you've as a team have done a great job of doing interviews, having people come here. So I've had a bevy of resources to look at for the research. So I'm trying to pick and choose my questions to see which ones haven't necessarily been asked. So if they're a little esoteric, that's why. But we'll certainly have more details if I miss anything in tasting notes and in the write-up for this episode as well. So I wanted to jump back in time a little bit to really one of the main reasons for the distillery being open, this population decline in the area. So the loss of population, and this is something that we've seen in many areas that we've talked about on the podcast, including the Hearach recently. These areas are suffering from either remoteness or people going off to war, not coming back, going to the cities for industry, the clearances, if you go back far enough. There's a lot of these cycles where, again, Bill Lawson says that, people come to places like Harris for the booms when new industries come in. So you have a flush of people coming in, but then they don't stay during the busts. Now, as we've said, a distillery is a new business here. This is something that has not been tried before, as far as we know. So is there, you said this a little bit, but I want to dig a little bit deeper. Like, how is the distillery designed and approached that it's such a long-term, Shona, you use the word generational vision for keeping people and hopefully growing the population of the island?
Yeah, so I think what Bill refers to there is true over the years, the decades, generations before. But I think modern life has changed everything. So yes, we live in a remote, well, actually it's not as remote as a lot of parts of Scotland. It's very accessible with ferries and planes. But I just think modern life and modern connectivity has made all the difference. So within our company, for example, all the jobs that we offer, there's quite a varied range of offerings in terms of employment for people, especially young people. So there's a lot of interesting, more modern jobs than they would have ever have had the opportunity to get in the past in our location in terms of traveling for work, international. Like Iona, for example, is our US. What's your actual title, Iona? Business Development Manager for
Business
the US.
development manager. We seem to have it all acquired quite long titles as the years have gone have gone on.
Yeah, so jobs like that, David, and in marketing and storytelling and social media, these jobs all sit alongside production, distilling. We've got officially the youngest distilling team in Scotland. Those skills were completely new to them. They all had different jobs beforehand. They didn't come straight from school. They just decided to change career and do something new and different here. There's all these interesting jobs alongside the more standard things like accounts and payroll and other jobs that people could have in any company. So I definitely think that modern life, we're all living modern Hebridean lives, and I think that's what will provide us with that longevity.
And I should say, just from looking at pictures, looking at videos, and hearing people talk about Isle of Harris in particular, it's certainly not being sent to Siberia. It's, even if it were still remote connection wise, there's humidity, but not a huge temperature fluctuation. I'm seeing between, the winter you're getting 6 to 8 degrees Celsius to 18 to 20 at most in the summer. This is very temperate.
Very.
You get the occasional storm like you had in 2014 with the 120-mile-an-hour gales coming through, but for the most part, and you're famous for your beaches. So it's not it might be a remote life, but it doesn't seem a hard life, if you will. So there is something about the natural beauty of the island to bring people there. And that brings me to my next question here. So one of the things that your marketing has done a wonderful job of telling is a story of the island and its geography and its geology at this Louisian gneiss. So it's almost 3 billion year old rock that makes up a lot of the islands. And I know this is a very, again, esoteric thing to pick up, but in the US, distillers here make such a big deal about being on limestone shelves and having hard water with lots of minerals in it. And not necessarily purposely, but Isle of Harris kind of sticks a finger in the eye to that to say, no, we have some of the hardest rock on Earth. There's almost no minerality on our water. I think you said there's just a little bit of sodium and calcium, and that's mainly coming from the sea spray as opposed to the rock itself. And you get the softest water. So I guess, without putting you in a position to make enemies, what would you say is just the argument for this soft water as opposed to needing like a limestone or something? What's special about the Harris water?
Well, I think if you could picture being here, I should have some drone footage or something for you. The distillery sits in Tarbert, as Iona said. Tarbert's the village, and Tarbert is the Norse word for a little strip of land between two sea lochs. So it's very short between the two lochs, so it's less than a mile. So if you can imagine the Vikings sailing in the East Loch, dragging their longboats over and out the West Loch, it saved them a lot of time going around the island. So that's where we sit in the middle of that bit of land, just on the head of the loch. And half a mile up the hill behind us is our water source. And you look up past the water source and the mountain of Gillival is behind it. So, the rainfall, it doesn't have very far to go down that hill, really. It's not, Harris is hilly, but it's not particularly mountainous, and the hills aren't that high compared with mainland Scotland. So it's got quite a short way to come down the river into the water source. As you said, doesn't pick up too many minerals on the way down, and then it has a short journey into the distillery here. But we do get the sea spray from both lochs. When you come to Harris, I'll take you up there and you can stand up next to the loch and you see both lochs, both sea lochs on either side. There's, that character from Sea Spray is everywhere. It's just a beautiful location, a wonderful place to have the distillery, and obviously we've got that. Well, we probably all claim that we have the softest water in Scotland because most of Scotland does have soft water, but it's running over that rock that's 3 billion years old, as you said, and we know that pretty much for a fact. It's water is one of those things, isn't it, in whiskey that, there's a myth and there's fact and lots of in between bits that are
For
more of
sure.
a grey area, shall we say.
For sure. In addition to Dave Broom's book, I just finished reading David Stirk's Pioneering Spirits. Again, Isle of Harris featured in that. I think he was there maybe a year after Dave, a year and a half after Dave. So you had started production at that point.
Yes, David was here last year, and the weather was amazing when he was here, which helped his photography an awful lot.
Yes,
actually, the weather was fantastic when Dave was here as well. We went out on a boat trip and everything. It was great. So yeah.
Yeah, I highly recommend those books for people to not only read about Isle of Harris, but also see some of the pictures. It's gorgeous. So with that soft water, I'm just picking that out because that's something that David brought up a lot with Pioneering Spirits, as well as recently Mike Billett with Peat and Whiskey, about how this slightly peated water is often very soft, creates this sweetness. It's odorless, tasteless, but can appear a little brown. So it can kind of confuse some people who aren't used to it. But no, I bring it out just because that's such a big part of the story of whiskey here in the States, of this hard water and limestone and all this. And it's not the only way to go. Let's put it that way. So
I think all Scottish water is very pure, whether it's soft or a little harder, depending on how far south you go. I think when it comes to peat, I really don't think personally that any peat influence in the water going into production will exist after distillation. But then we use our own water, obviously, to cut the spirit to cask strength as well, and for bottling. So I think maybe that's where that character comes in.
For sure. And with peat in particular, we're probably not going to your point, we're probably not going to taste it or smell it unless it's pyrolyzed, in which case, if it's just coming in from the water, that's not going to get anything from it there, other than just the fact that it's soft water. So just before I move into the gin next, I want to ask, so you said you were able to cut local peat for a little bit. I know this can sometimes be a sensitive issue on the legal side, the ecological side. Is there a limit to how much peat you're allowed to cut from your area, or how much you plan to use?
Not really, because a lot of people don't cut peat anymore like they did traditionally, So I was giving you all the benefits of modern life earlier on in terms of employment and working remotely and things like that. But modern life pressures have also, kind of stopped things like peat cutting as much, because people have central heating and they don't need to put a peat fire on, and they work all day, and so therefore they don't have days and days in the summer to cut peat and dry them and things like that, which is a shame. So some people do, but generally it's not done. A lot of people don't have open fires in their homes anymore. There's lots of new build houses here and you can't actually have an open fire. So things like that. And commercially, we have only ever done it once, so it's not an issue at all for us to use. People have ownership of peat banks generally through the generations, so you don't sort of necessarily pay for an area of land and then you can cut as much peat as you like. It's very, it's a bit of an open book, or it's another grey area, I guess. But no, we would have to extract an awful lot of peat in order to do that. And like I said, we've only done it once. More of a novelty than anything, but certainly to create another batch of whiskey that would be very different from the Highland peat we use, and that would be 100% from Harris. Then it's just not possible for us to do that. It's not practical to do that all the time. So it is maturing really well, and we've just recently taken some samples from some sherry casks, some Oloroso casks, and Heaven Hill casks as well, and it's really great. I can confirm.
I hope when it comes out, I hope to be able to at least grab a sample because I love tasting the locality like that. So good, bad, or otherwise, I like tasting it. And trust me, I've had some bad peat as well. So I'm glad to
Well, I
hear it's
can
coming
tell
out
you
well.
that. Yes, you have to take my word for it in the meantime. So
Yeah.
that was 6 years ago we distilled that. So the casks we have from the Harris Peat are 6 years old. 2018 they were filled. And it's their 10th anniversary this September.
Mhm.
So we may well, roll it out and do something with it to be
Uh,
confirmed.
to be confirmed. So with that, I want to move over to the gin. And normally wouldn't spend a ton of time on gin on the podcast, but in this case, it's important for a couple of different reasons. So the number one reason is the gin first product to come out from Isle of Harris, arguably how you got your name out there the most, highly successful, a really delicious gin. I had it before, and then I got to retaste it thanks to the brand. So it's a fairly simple recipe. We're not talking 50 botanicals here. It's
Oh, yeah, 9 botanicals.
9 botanicals. It's classics:
Mhm.
juniper, which you got to have, coriander, cubebs, which type of peppercorn. I had to look that up. Uh, Cassia bark, angelica root, bitter orange peel, licorice root, and the key ingredient, sugar kelp. So
Sure.
that one is the differentiator for sure. Uh, so the first question I have is how. I guess it's a local thing, so it's probably more obvious that I'm making it. But why sugar kelp?
Why sugar kelp? Well, when we were developing the recipe for the gin, as a lot of the botanicals are fairly generic in gin making, and then people will choose something that's growing in their local area and add that in and develop their amazing recipe from that. So we did undertake a bit of a study with an ethnobotanist who Burr, our founder, I think she was a friend of Burr's daughter, Petra. So she came across here and she did a bit of foraging and came up with a couple of different plants that grow locally that could be used. And then it kind of occurred to her, well, why don't I look under the sea as well while I'm here? She liked wild swimming. And that's where the sugar kelp came from. So at that time, nobody else had used seaweed. Lots of people have since, but not sugar kelp specifically, I don't think. So, it was a bit of a challenge to see whether it was actually possible to use it because we have to obviously harvest it and then dry it. And, you can't use it fresh unless you can get your hands on, all the botanicals are dried, as you know. So with a bit of research and study, we decided to go for that. And it just, it works so well with the other botanicals. There's quite a lot of sweetness in those botanicals, with a nice balance of, pepper and spice as well. The cubebs that you talked about, those are Java peppercorns. So they look like black peppercorns in our kitchen, but they've still got a little tail on them.
Mhm.
And they are very sort of lemon and, lemony flavored as well as peppery, really fragranced. The cassia bark is sweet and spicy, and the kind of saltiness of the sugar kelp just really worked so well in our recipe. We were very lucky. We really hit the nail on the head with the recipe, and also the timing, because there was a big gin boom from 2015 onwards for a few years, and we were riding the crest of that wave for certain.
I swear you must be reading my notes because that was my next question. Was we look at the UK gin market being fairly saturated at this point, but in 2015, uh, my exact words were, "Did you get ahead of that curve?" So yeah, it just you rode that wave, you hit it right on the mark, and it has not only been successful enough to keep the doors open, which is usually the first concern, but it's been successful enough that you've been able to keep your whiskeys aging for longer than the 3 years minimum necessary
Yeah,
to be called
certainly for
Scotch.
sure. Yeah, we were really lucky, excuse me, with the success of the gin for that reason. As you mentioned, lots of new distilleries simply can't afford to leave their whiskey maturing, um, well into 5, 6, 7+ years. And our whiskey is still young. The age profile of the Hearach is sort of 5 to 7 years. So, but it was still, every year it makes a difference to the maturation. Every 6 months does, even from what we've seen in our young casks. So that was absolutely a wonderful blessing being able to leave it that bit longer. So we love our gin and we're very thankful to it for being so well behaved over the years.
And the perhaps the most notable thing about the gin before you even taste it, and I'm holding up the bottle. I know this will be audio only, so it's kind of pointless to hold up the bottle, but it's worth it just to feel it. This is a beautiful bottle, and its design is echoed further in the bottles for the Hearach. Again, forgive my pronunciation. I'm doing the best that I can with a city accent and with a cold. So, but no, it's you can feel the fingerprints and the grip on the bottle,
Yeah.
which is something fairly unique. And I bring it up also because so you worked with Stranger and Stranger to have these bottles designed, and they are a former guest of the podcast. I actually had them on to talk specifically about their work with Compass Box, because
Yes,
they've done,
that's right.
nearly all of their releases, if not all of them. But now they keep coming up more and more in who they're working with, and I love to see it because they're just such a creative bunch. Do you know how you got connected with Stranger and Stranger and what that process was like creating these?
I'm not sure exactly how Simon, our managing director, connected with them initially. Had somebody made an introduction? I'm not too sure about that, but I do know that he went to them really and explained what they were trying to achieve here, what they were doing, what their plan was for the project, and basically said, "We've hardly any money. Would you like to help us out?" And they fell in love with the whole idea, and they did that. Obviously, we paid them, but they must have had a little bit of faith to stick with us. So they came on board, and the company invested in getting them up here. This was long before the distillery started to be built. It was in the earlier days of when they were trying to lay those foundations and figure out, could it be achieved? Was it possible getting funding? All of those things. So a couple of folk from Stranger came up and they spent a few days in Harris. They had a dram on the beach at sunset and they, explored the island. They flew in as well. So, you can imagine what that looks like, what the sea looks like when you're flying in on quite a low plane landing up in Lewis, and just all these, you can imagine how creative they are. They're amazing. So all these ideas were, pardon the pun, swimming around in their head, and they went off and designed these amazing bottles. So the whiskey bottle was designed at the same time as the gin bottle, long before any bricks or any foundations were put down here. And then Simon and Ron and Burr basically used those designs as props to go around the world looking for investment. So they were showing, telling the story of the island and showing people what they were trying to achieve through these two drawings, basically, of the two bottles, because they do both speak of the island so much. So seeing them come to life was just amazing.
They're definitely eye-catching. They feel good in the hand, is a way to put it. Particularly gin bottle, I
Yeah.
have to say, feels really good in the hand. And the whiskey bottles, because of how they're designed, they're shorter, stouter. I think a bottle like that allows the color to concentrate a little more, so you get a better sense of what you're going to look like in the glass as well. It also, and this might be the bane of bartenders sometimes, but it also requires you to have more space for the bottle. So it has to have its own dedicated space. Can't be put on its side. Like, it's got to be right there. So no,
It's quite unusual for a whiskey bottle because then they tend to be taller and slimmer.
Right.
I always see it as more like a decanter, I think there's a bit of ceremony pouring a dram out of the Hearach bottle because it's quite heavy and it is more like pouring from a decanter. And in the gin bottle, the smoothed out areas that you talked about, that's to sort of make it look and feel like it was a bottle washed up on the shore. And
yeah, I love it. It matches, for me at least. It matches perfectly to my right hand, my thumb, and then my first two fingers on the right side, and it fits perfectly. It feels like you're holding something that someone else held.
Oh,
So
I
that,
know,
that
that's
connection's
amazing.
lovely.
That's a lovely way to put it. Yes, for sure.
Yeah. So actually, so now that we have appropriately fawned over the yeast, let's try that again. Now that we've appropriately fawned over the gin, which does deserve such treatment, Let's move into the whiskey. So we already touched on a couple of points. So it's all Scottish barley. It's Concerto and Laureate variety. Uh,
Mhm.
Highland peat, except for those couple of barrels that came from the island. And I should say also, this is your remote island. You don't have a malt house on site like that. That would also make a big difference, but that would also be extremely expensive. So, uh,
Yeah, and we don't have barley growing here, David, either. We don't
right,
really
it's not.
have fields.
Yeah,
Harris is very rocky, especially the north part of Harris where we are. It's hilly and rocky. Is almost like the moon in parts. So there were no. That's probably why there were no, kind of commercial distilleries here traditionally,
sure,
because we didn't have barley growing in excess. So the southern part of the island is greener, and then you move down to the islands below that, and Uist is much greener.
mm,
I know that North Uist Distillery are growing some barley there, but probably wouldn't be enough for them, to use just that alone.
sure,
So yeah,
sure.
no malting here.
Yeah, and again, it makes me wonder again how the people on Pabe were able to make anything. I mean, that doesn't look much more habitable is not the
Well,
right word, but
yeah,
yeah,
actually, it's pretty green on Pabby. It's much greener than it is up in North Harris where we are. So if you were here, we'd drive through the north of Harris, which is really rocky, down towards the south, and then you see it starting to get greener. And the island of Pabby is in between Harris and North Uist, so it gets greener and greener as you go down. So actually, Pabby is very green compared with where we are here.
but even so though, it seems just by population record, it seems like between 15 to 20 people was the maximum that the island could support
Mm.
on its own. So if you
Right.
take just the portion of whatever is being grown plus some livestock, and then you set aside some of that for making whiskey, it just seems let's put it this way. I understand why it didn't continue and why it was a very
Mhm.
small scale operation. It's just
Yeah, it's a
practicality
small
wise.
island, yeah. I
Yeah,
suppose they would have just been fermenting what they had left over, wouldn't they? Really, and then
pretty much.
making
Yeah,
some whiskey from that. There's a good story about the boat that used to take supplies over to Paddy. It had a blue sail, but when the excise man came on board, they raised the red sail so that everybody on the island knew who was aboard. So they could
and
set about hiding things here and there, you know?
every area has one of those things. It could be the sail, it could be a quilt going up, some cry going up from the hillside that no one else would notice, but everyone has a way to get around the excise taxman. So I love those little things. Um, so the barley comes in, it's malted, and then you're using Lallemand MV Distillamax yeast.
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier you have variable fermentation lengths. So you have the shorter, which is about 72 hours, and then the longer at 120 hours.
Mhm.
Uh, how I'm curious in particular how the yeast reacts to the different fermentation times.
Yeah, so the volumes are exactly the same. Twice a day, we do 10 mashes a week. So each mash is about 1.2 tons of barley, 6,000 litres of liquid. So that's the 6,000 litres of wash that goes into the washbacks. We add 6 kilos of yeast to that. So we do it exactly the same way, whether we are doing a long or short fermentation. The only difference is there's 1 or 2 degrees of temperature change between them. So a little lower for the longer fermentations. So it all gets mixed together, obviously, at the end. So we collect the spirit twice a week for cask filling. So we don't really separate out the two different distillation times. They just, fermentation times. They all get, it goes together. So the shorter ones give us, from the wash, a much more cereal-based flavour, less sweet, more what you might expect from a kind of um, wash that would make a heavier spirit. And then the longer fermentations are much lighter, much fruitier. So it's a really nice combination together. We've never yet done, one or the other. It's always a combination.
Again, being the ex scientist, I'd love to try the different ones. Just I think of the yeast variations being on the especially once you get to the longer one,
Mhm.
most of the yeast is probably dead or inactive by the time that fermentation is done. But then you get the
Yeah.
secondary, and as you said, all those the cereal notes kind of diminish, and you get those fruity notes.
Mhm.
And one note that I share with you in your notes for the Hearach is pear. So
Okay, yes,
you
yeah.
know, this general orchard fruit is definitely there, but pear specifically. And I think for me, these newer wave of single malts and malt whiskeys from Scotland and Ireland and around the world, really, they tend to lean more into the kind of lemony
Mm.
citrus notes to it. And when the orchard comes through, it's mainly like a generic apple in a way. But pear was fairly unusual, and
Yeah,
not
do you
just in
think
the
so? Okay. Hmm.
yeah, it was unusual not just for its presence, but also for its clarity. It was just unmistakably okay. That's a pear. I know that that's a pear. So I mean, I'm sure part of that comes from the yeast and the distillation. Um, so with that, moving into the distillation itself, another unusual point, you have not Forsyths, not Carls, not Vendome, but still Frilly stills from
Yeah,
Sienna.
sure.
So
Yeah, that came about really because of the timing. So when the distillery was being developed, and there were quite a lot of other whiskey distilleries in Scotland being built at the same time. So the lead time for stills from Forsyth was something like 3 years.
mm,
I'm not sure exactly how long, but it was too long. So we hadn't ordered them in advance. So that's really wise. So Frilly are a family of grappa still makers, and Burr had a connection with them in Siena. I'm not 100% sure what his connection with them was, but so they were approached to see if they could make whiskey stills, and subsequently they've made others. In fact, Rassay stills have been made by Frilly as well.
I noted I wasn't going to jump the gun on that without take I didn't want to take away from you guys for that, but yes, that will definitely be part of my questioning for them as well.
Mhm.
With these stills, they're not wildly different designs. I mean, a still, and we talked with Mike Billet about this in a way that, or no, not Mike. I'm sorry. We talked with, oh my goodness, who was it? Wow, that's embarrassing. It's going right out of my head. We spoke to someone recently about still design and how there's not a lot of new ground to be found there.
Mhm.
But uh, the so they're not wildly different, but they're pot still design. But there's enough difference. It looks to me, again, this is from pictures, so that can be a little misleading, but they look a little bit taller, a little more narrow, perhaps once you get out of the bottom bulb.
Mhm.
So for you, what do you just with the 10 years of experience now, blending, distilling, smelling, all that sensory experience you've had, um, what do you feel those stills give that make them unique?
Well, I mean, they were designed to be neither too tall or too dumpy. So the spirit style was, to be kind of light and fruity, but with the added ability to make it one or the other on either side of that. So there's a purifier on the spirit still, which was put in there to be able to make for us to be able to make a much lighter spirit if we wanted to. As it happens, it's not big enough, so it turns out. So, if in order for us to make a much lighter spirit now, we would have to slow down our distillation rate, for example. So there are things in there that sounded like a great idea, and we thought that that would work. But in hindsight, maybe the purifier isn't going to work. So they were kind of designed as an in between style. So we weren't going for a really heavy spirit. We weren't going for a particularly very light one. Somewhere in between, and it is the only spirit we know. So I mean, that's really all I can say about them at the moment. We could try and do other things there, or pop in another still of a different style and see what it does. But in our short, limited years of experience, it just has created the Hearach, Like you asked earlier, what was our hope for our spirit, and just that it made sense to Harris, and that's still what it does to us. So they are our stills. They are what they are. They're very young. They give us challenges, of course, from time to time. But they've also given us so many awards as well. So yeah, that's it. It's just still learning.
And that's
Pardon the pun
another
again. Still
that's
learning.
right. Uh, but that, I mean, again, to an earlier point, this gives another opportunity for a local or a couple of locals to learn still design and learn copperworking and engineering
Yeah,
to
for
figure out the
sure.
problems.
Yeah, I mean, we never had a copper, somebody who was certified to work on copper here. So, since then, our local specialist welders company have trained somebody to do that. So if we have anything wrong, they can come down, there and then to fix it. That wasn't the case in the past. In other areas like in Speyside, for example, or if you're down in Islay, if something goes wrong, that you've got lots of neighbours that will have critical spares that you can call upon. We don't really have that here. But we're getting there, with our neighbouring distilleries up and coming. One day we'll have more. It'll be more of a distillery neighbourhood than it is now. But yeah, as you said, it's all of these things are new, like engineering, for example. Iona mentioned earlier our original distillers. They didn't have any distilling experience, of course, so we weren't set up to helicopter people in who knew what they were doing. The whole purpose was to create employment and new skills for people. But they all had various, experience in engineering and building and facilities management and things like that. So that was very handy. And as you say, for now our young crew of distillers, they're learning all about that stuff as well and how to operate our plant and about the plumbing and the valves and the engineering of it. And the stills, I guess, as well. Every time we have to do something, we learn. If a piece falls off a pipe somewhere, then we learn what to do with it next time. It's definitely a learning curve.
In many ways, it's going back to that old style. Farmers are some of the best fixers that you'll ever meet because they have to.
Absolutely.
You
Yeah,
know, so it's a similar to me. It's a very similar ideal that if you're remote enough where you got to figure it out yourself, you learn, and it's a beautiful thing to me.
it is for
Uh,
sure.
the last quick thing on the distillation. Again, we'll have more on the distillation process in the write up, but I did note that you don't recycle or redistill the heads and tails, which is sometimes most people I think do that just to kind of get as much as they can out of the spirit. But
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
curious why not and when that decision was made.
So you're talking about gin,
Oh,
yeah?
is that just for the gin or is
Oh
that the
yes,
whiskey as well?
that's only for the gin. No, we use
Oh,
everything
my
with
apologies.
whiskey. It's only with the
Okay.
gin that we discard the heads and tails.
Okay.
So
So
you don't
honestly, that
have to
makes more
do that
sense then.
either
So
with gin. Yeah, yes, yeah. No, we would never be able to afford that investment or be so wasteful.
okay.
With the gin,
That was my
it was
question. So that yeah.
yeah, you must have wondered why we do that. So with the gin, it was a decision that was made, and yes, it's a costly one. It's investment to do that, but it's given us a really clean spirit, and hence the price tag is a little higher than it might be for other gins. But with whiskey, no, no, everything goes back into the next wash. So
Okay. Yeah.
all
That
reused. Yeah.
all right. So it comes out of the still, and of course it goes into the barrel. You have a couple of barrels, and this is something. Again, this is not just you; it's the wave of new distilleries that does this, and I love it. It's the transparency wherever possible of where the casks come from. So for ex bourbon, you're getting Heaven Hill, some Buffalo Trace, I think Woodford as well.
Yeah.
The Jose Miguel Martin for the sherry,
Mhm.
which is I mean, it's a very well-known bodega. I was trying to search for the word there, that other than sherry house, well-known bodega with very high quality casks. So I see in Whiskey Magazine they had a picture of the racking in the warehouse, and I saw that you have barrels both racked and palletized.
Mhm.
So whenever I see both, I'm curious: is there a difference to what goes where, or was that more a function of what space was available at the time?
So what you saw, whatever picture you saw, the only casks that were on dunnage are privately owned casks, and
Okay.
all of our stock for the Hearach is palletized 5 high. in the warehouses. So maybe if you find the photo again of the warehouse, you might notice an H on the end of the barrels and possibly some names on them. So when we opened, like most distilleries, we pre-sold our inaugural bottlings, so people waited a long time for those. We also did a private cask scheme, so we sold 200 casks to people privately. And then we didn't really intend on selling any more private casks, but people kept asking, and it was too tempting. So we we sold some more and some more, and now it's become a kind of part of the business in its own right. We have somebody dedicated entirely to managing the private cask scheme because we have over 700 now. So those are all stored dunnage style. And the reason for that is really so people can visit them, and visually they look really nice. They're part of our storytelling. And all these people have made that commitment to us. All the connections are amazing. So that's the only stock that we do have on dunnage. Everything else is palletized. And that's really just for practical reasons of space,
No, that makes sense. And I know this may have been you said somewhere that you're on a remote island. To build a new warehouse or rickhouse is expensive, takes a long time, so you got to maximize the space available.
Yeah, it's certainly financially a downside to building a distillery in a location like this, because you've got to invest so heavily in warehousing. So if we were outside, an island, we're on the mainland, you might just hire some space in a bond somewhere. We couldn't do that because we wanted the provenance and everything to be here, to be distilled, matured and bottled on the island. That's a fundamental part of what we do, of our story. So yes, you have to build expensive warehouses. Getting more expensive over time, always.
And as you said, with the provenance, even the bottling is done on island. And something I really respected is that when the Scotch Malt Whisky Society came knocking and said, we want to do a cask here, a couple of casks even, he said, that's fine, but you have to bring the bottles to the island to be filled. The cask does not leave the island. And, they're a fairly substantial entity in and of themselves. I don't know. I feel like they would be pretty open to that anyway, but still keeping to your guns there and saying, no, you can bottle this, but you have to do it here too.
Simon was very definite about that. So he said to them, yes, we'd love to do this collaboration work with you, but it needs to be bottled here. So that's what we did. And they were great. It's the first time they've done that as well. They actually came over with their content team and we made a thing of it. It was fantastic.
That was one of my research things that I watched, and it was lovely to see as well. But before we, just in our last 15, 20 minutes or so, just before we pull back to the 30,000 foot view again, Iona, I wanted to throw it over to you, since you were, well, Shona, you're seeing on the island, obviously what is happening and traveling as well. But Iona, being U.S. brand ambassador, I would love to hear from both of you. What the response has been so far, and what it looks like it's going to be. This could be worldwide, but particularly in the U.S., as I would assume is a pretty big market to come.
Yeah, it is. It's been amazing actually, David. It's been so exciting. Shona's been telling you, all about the story and how much, everyone that works with the distillery takes such pride in not just the distillery, but the island. So it's been really exciting for, so many of the team to have sort of spread our wings over the years and, as we've expanded internationally and go to different markets and tell the story and connect with people as well. I travel out to US a lot, and I'm always meeting someone that maybe has a connection to Harris or has been to Harris or to the Outer Hebrides, and it's always so nice to share that. So it's really been lovely. It's been a really nice part of our journey expanding internationally. So we're in over 20 markets around the world. And I'm sure it's no surprise to you that the US is our number one international market, which makes me very happy, because that's obviously my my job to work closely with our distributors out there, and yeah, it's been great. So we launched the gin into the US back in it was about May 2021. So just coming up for 4 years, and we deliberately had waited to go into the market. As you know, the distillery and the gin came out in 2015, but we didn't want to rush into the US market because we knew what an important market it was going to be for us. And we wanted to take our time and be ready for it, and do it right and find the right partners. So that's what we did. So back in 2021, and then obviously the Hearach, when we released globally at the same time. So it's been in the US since we launched it on Harris September 2023. And actually, Shona came out with me just a few months ago. We were out at the time of our Oloroso, the Hearach Oloroso being launched in October, just there. And we visited a few different states and a few of our partners. So, the reception's been great. We've been really lucky that this small, island distillery has gathered loyal fans around the world, and especially, as I say, for us in the US now. It's been a really exciting time for us, actually. In the last year, I think we've seen some great partnerships developing as well. So hopefully people are starting to see the gin and the whiskey out there more and more in the shelves and in the bars. And actually, just in the last kind of 6 months, we've employed 2 brand ambassadors that are out in the US. So both Scottish, and have moved over to the States. One who's been in the States for quite a long time, and our other ambassador just recently moved over to stateside. So it's been wonderful having Charlie and Robin both part of our team, and yeah, and exciting for the whole distillery, actually, having 2 team members based over, and one's in Austin and one's in California. Yeah. So it's great. I mean, it's funny, because of the time difference, I don't really start we don't really start meetings and things with the team out there until now. So there's obviously challenges, but it's been wonderful having people on the ground, so to speak, out there full time now for the brand.
I was going to say the Californians are just waking up at this point. So
yeah.
I wondered, actually, David, where you're based, when I thought 2 o'clock was quite an early start.
Yes. It's what was it, around it was around nine here. Not bad for me. I've got a little one, so we're up early anyway.
Okay.
Yeah. So mentioned the launching of the Hearach September 22nd of 23. I encourage people listening to take some time and look at the opening ceremony, which was recorded and is available on YouTube or through the Isle of Harris website. It was just a really beautiful ceremony. I felt it spoke to not only the Gaelic tradition that is still very much alive there with the music and culture, but also having people speak. And Shona, I believe you were one of those who spoke at the event to speak to why this is an important thing, why they have stayed, why they are, the original Tarbert 10 are, the Tarbert 10, and why so many are all of them still with the distillery, or most of them?
Actually, no. There are 6 of us left.
That's
so one is retired,
impressive.
and a couple of others have moved on to other, areas or roles. So there's still 6 out of 10.
That's very impressive.
We've got almost 50 members of staff now, which is amazing.
Yeah, I mean,
but that was an emotional day. It sure was. It was an emotional day, especially with the speeches, because, it was a big milestone for us, and it means so much to us. It was, emotional.
And what spoke to me perhaps the most, there were a couple of points that did this, but I believe his name was Peter, your staff member from Poland originally.
Yes.
Spoke, and much of the story is about what this distillery brings and keeps on the Isle of Harris. But Peter, being from Poland, has come over, and he spoke eloquently about the sense of belonging and the sense of family that has been created there, and this culture of let's keep it with family, this culture of family that again speaks to this generational goal to keep people on Harris, to keep attracting people to stay. So again, I really encourage people to go search that. I'll include a link in the show notes because it was worth it to take the time out to look at it. Plus, you hear some beautiful Scottish music and singing, never a bad thing. So with that, I want to pull out to the larger view just as we start closing out, which is, let's start with words from Burr himself. So in the 1970s, 1980s, this is a quote, in the 1970s and 1980s, there was a feeling that this Isle of Harris, the Outer Hebrides, was a backwater. You were second class. Now there's a totally different vibe to it. Pride in what we do and where we are. It is important to get this right for Harris. End quote. Shona, you are a native Hearach. Iona, are you as well? I don't know.
No, I'm not.
No, okay.
Yeah, no, I'm from west coast of Scotland, but not from Harris.
Fair enough. So Shona, in your personal experience, if you're willing to share, how accurate is Burr here, and has this change been noticed over the years?
Well, I wasn't around in the 60s, despite how old maybe I look through the screen.
No, as soon as I said it, I was going to say, I know you weren't around back then. So that's on me. I apologize for that. But
I was around in the 70s, unfortunately, but I was quite young. So yeah, he's probably right. I mean, I don't know. That's a difficult thing to answer for me. I'm not sure. I mean, we had a wonderful upbringing. There was loads of freedom. I suppose we didn't really know what it was like to live anywhere else, although we visited the mainland frequently to go on holiday and visit family and things like that. I suppose maybe in those days it was considered as more remote, although it's not any different geographically now, but just the world has shrunk, hasn't it? Modern life has made that happen, I guess.
Sure. But it seems like this is very much a place that people want to go to for holiday, for just for the beaches, and now for the distillery as well. And in 2019, you had, so this is a couple years after the distillery had opened, you had a couple of up to 100,000 visitors coming to the island every year. Obviously, COVID probably put a big dent in that. But how has the island and the distillery been recovering after COVID?
So yes, it is a big destination for tourism. So that's a huge thing here for us. But it's very seasonal. So our tourist season lasts sort of really from April to end of September, October. And that really is a big deal for us. So yeah, we haven't recovered. Tourism hasn't recovered to the 100,000 bingo number that came through the door in 2019. But we had 70,000 last year, and we expect something similar this year. That's still a lot of people visiting our islands. I mean, that's just through our own doors. I think visitor numbers to the Hebrides, something like 250,000 to the Hebrides in total, Outer Hebrides. So it's great, and there's not a great deal of things to do indoors here for visitors. It's all about the outdoors. People come for the walking and the beaches and sailing and surfing and that sort of thing. So the distillery was really welcomed in that way as well, because we're open. You can come in and have a tour, come and sit by the fire in our foyer and have a coffee or a dram. So it was something different, and from that perspective as well, for tourists and locals alike, as well as the distilling side of things being new, that in terms of a visitor centre, if you want to call it that, that was new here as well. And yeah, we have a lot of people through our doors. It's amazing. And then it's very quiet in the 3 or 4 months in the winter, when everybody kind of tends to hibernate a little bit more, and lots of food offerings and things like that shut down because it's just not busy enough. And then it starts to come to life again in March and April onwards. We get lots of visitors. It's great. It's almost like the seasons for me, the visitors coming and going. It's seasonal, so it's just part of life, that the winter is quiet and the summer is really busy and you meet lots of new people. It's great.
But I really do hope to visit at some point. Again, with the little one, I'm not sure how long it might take me to visit, but I will be there, and the distillery certainly seems like it will be there as well. Uh, so normally, my last question would be about legacy. Um, in this case, I want to tweak it a little bit because clearly one of the legacies that the distillery is going to be, as we've said, is this generational long-term vision, repopulate the island, bring people here to visit, to taste the spirit, get the name of the island out there through the gin, through the whiskey, and have people come back. So I wanted to look at it slightly differently. We mentioned the we'll let you say it again because I've now forgotten it. The distillery on Lewis Avondale.
Hearach, yeah.
Hearach. Okay. I was close again. That would not be accepted on Jeopardy. So so Hearach is on Lewis, and then new distilleries planned. This is from Dave's book, Sense of Place. New distilleries planned for Benbecula, Bata, and Thierry. So all, Hebridean, Outer Hebridean. This is an idea for what Dave called this new sense of a Hebridean movement. Distilleries working together, a new whiskey trail, a festival in the way that Spaceside's got theirs and Fagil in Islay. Shona, to go back to the beginning of the interview and something that you kind of flipped for me in terms of the inspiration, that Isle of Harris is now the inspiration and a guiding force for some of these newer distilleries. How do you view that as you see these new distilleries popping up? How do you view the Isle of Harris distillers' role in this new wave?
Well, I think in the Outer Hebrides, going back, actually, what Dave was touching on there was we founded the Hebridean Whiskey Trail probably about 6 years ago. So there was Isle of Harris Distillery, Raasay, Torravig, and Talisker. So Talisker obviously is so much older. They're 200 years old. But the other three of us were very young and more or less around the same age. I think we opened just before the other two, but as we were talking about, our purpose is much the same. So those three distilleries in Skye, and we're in Harris. So we started this Hebridean Whiskey Trail in order to try and, have our mini sort of festival, if you like, mini trail in this region. And it's just been added to recently because of the up and coming US distilleries. So now we've got both of the Benbecula distilleries, North US Distillery and Benbecula Distillery on board as well. And we're hoping for others to join as time goes on. So I think especially with our younger neighbours in US, it's really great to have other people starting to do what we're doing. And we're so young ourselves, but, we feel like we're, that little bit ahead of them, and we can help in any way, and we're very supportive of each other. And same with our neighbours in Skye, because geographically they're only a ferry ride away, so they're a different island. And I think Skye is maybe technically part of the Inner Hebrides, not the Outer Hebrides, but they're nearer to us and they're part of our trail. So it's really great to see all these other distilleries opening up just south of us, and I'm going to visit them soon. I haven't actually been yet. So it's great. It's more like a community. It's more like a little community then when there are more of us, because initially we did feel quite out of the way, and we would only go and visit other industry folk or colleagues or other distilleries maybe a couple of times a year. So to have others on our doorstep is amazing. It's great.
Yeah, geographically from the air, Skye does seem like, as you said, it's part of the Inner Hebrides, but it's like the outer part of the Inner Hebrides. So it's
the northern,
it's definitely facing you.
Westerly part, yeah.
Exactly.
Well, so can I just mention actually the Hebridean Whiskey Trail or Whiskey Festival? You should take a look at that. And for the short number of years we've been running it, in September every year, we have a week-long festival. So that is our Fagil, if you like. So it's still, early days, but we've had 3 years of it. So each of the Skye distilleries have taken their turn of hosting the festival. Actually, Rossi haven't yet. They've still to take a turn. And this year being our 10th birthday anniversary in September as well, we're hosting the festival finale here. So, like I said, each distillery has a day where they have their own events, and then on the Saturday of that week, everybody comes together in a different location. So last year, all of us, all the members were in Torraveg, and we all set up our pop-up shops, and we all get together and we have a whole day festival of music, and we sell and sample and do lots of tastings, and it's really great. So we're hosting that in Harris this year on the 13th of September.
I will definitely
So
include that in the notes.
very much looking forward to that.
That sounds wonderful. I know I have friends who I'm not sure if they've gone to the Hebridean festival yet. Obviously they've gone to the larger ones. They probably have gone to the Hebridean now that I think about it. I have one friend, actually, Shona, you'll be meeting him shortly, Charlie from Drammers.
Oh, yes. Yes,
yes.
right. You know Charlie. So I
Yes.
am meeting with them next Saturday night.
Yes. So I believe it'll probably be after this, or sorry, it'll be before this goes live, but we share many patrons and followers. So happy to, we'll bank off of each other so that we get more for more visibility for Harris in the meantime. But if anyone's been to all of them, it's Charlie. I'll give that to him.
Yeah, we realised, it's no mean feat to get round them all in a few days. It's a little easier in Islay or in Speyside to do that, or Campbelltown, because you need to get ferries in between each and every one of us and things like that. But
that sounds like it's worth it.
Keeping on, so it's good.
Well, with that, Shona, Iona, thank you both for joining. She's also off camera, but thank you to Heather Falconer and her agency for helping to set this up. Please, both of you, hang on with me just for a moment after I finish recording. This has been another episode of the Whiskey Ring podcast. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Please do look for Isle of Harris. It is now in the US, the gin, the Hearach whiskey. You can find it. Please do. It is worth trying wherever you can. I'm a big fan, and I'll be getting my own very shortly. So thank you all again for listening. Rate and subscribe wherever you can. And cheers, Slanjava, to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.